Welcome to Chess with Link, folks. Today we're talking about Anastasia's mate. This is an odd little checkmate that involves a combination of a knight and a piece that can move up and down the ranks of the chessboard. It's usually a rook, sometimes a queen. In fact, sometimes it even involves a queen sacrifice. I love this checkmate for two reasons. The first is that it's a little bit of a historical oddity. You see, the name comes from a German novel published in the very early 1800s called Anastasia and the Game of Chess. And I'll tell you, I have tried so hard to find an English translation of this novel, and all I can find are machine translated versions or even machine narrated versions. So if you happen to know a good English translation of Anastasia and the Game of Chess, please mention it in the comments or tell me about it in class if you happen to be in one of my OutSchool classes. But the second reason is that it really forces us to think about protecting our king and doing combination attacks. Let me show you what I mean. Here in this basic Anastasia's mate puzzle, it at first looks like black is in a pretty good position. The king could theoretically run out onto the main part of the board to escape an attack, or he could duck back behind his own pieces. In fact, as the white player, we're probably a little concerned about a back rank checkmate happening. But observe the knight. Our knight at e7 threatens g8 and g6, preventing the king from running away. If we attack with our rook going over to the h-file at h5, rook from c5 to h5 is checkmate in one turn. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated if we introduce more pieces, but the same basic pattern holds up. The knight prevents the king from stepping back behind his defending wall of pawns. And even if we have to sacrifice a piece in order to get our rook over and attacking, the checkmate can work. Let's take our queen from e4 up to h7, which I know sounds crazy because it's a sacrifice. Queen to h7, our opponent captures with their king, but remember, not only does the knight prevent the king from stepping back behind his own apparently defensive line of pawns, it also prevents him from stepping out towards the center. So this castled king, so recently completely safe, is now vulnerable to that same attack by going rook to h5. Now, in a real game of chess, you're not going to always have that knight ready and waiting for you. You're not going to always have that obvious queen and rook attack with the sacrifice and the checkmate just waiting for you to take. But can you see a pattern? As we look at our board here, do you see how we can reproduce that exact same checkmate with only one extra move? Our queen is already lined up threatening h7, and our rook already is prepared to go to h5 once our own knight is out of the way. Well, if we're thinking in terms of gaining tempo, if we're thinking about gaining momentum as we play, about forcing our opponent to take a move that they don't want to take if we ourselves aren't quite sure what to do next, we can take our knight up there from d5 to e7. It is completely safe, and it is able to check our opponent and set up that exact same attack that we saw in the previous puzzle. By driving the king into the corner, sacrificing our queen at h7, forcing the king to capture, attracting him to a square that he cannot escape from, we can then bring our rook over to h5, just like we did before. Now this final puzzle, which I'll help you think through, but I'm not going to give you the full solution to, is straight from the Lichess practice database. And the key is to think about where we can threaten the king and how we can navigate this forest of pieces all scattered about the board to force our opponent to make a bad move. Remember that if we put a valuable piece in a vulnerable position, sometimes our opponent will capture it, and if they're in check when we do that, they will have to capture it. And then, even though this feels like a very perilous board, even though that queen at c5 is threatening to take our d6 rook, even though we have to make sure that we don't lose that d6 rook, and if we do lose that d6 rook, we don't move our own rook off of b8, or we will be back ranked by the queen moving to f8. If we let go of the fear of that queen pressure, and we think about how to gain a little bit of momentum, how to check our opponent, and then how to take advantage of a knight combining with a queen and maybe also with a rook, we can see that that familiar Anastasia's mate pattern is still available. As I mentioned, folks, this checkmate has been studied for over 200 years. And it has even been used as an example of the elegance of chess, of how by combining logical thinking and creative thinking, a chess player can make a surprising move that their opponent may not be expecting, and have that move snowball into a victory. Do your best to find the solution to the puzzle on the screen. Have a great day.